Okay, thank you very much for coming back to the kickoff seminar, strengthening the transparency of the Antarctic Treaty System. Thank you very much. So we will have the latter part of the morning seminar, and we will have the panel discussions amongst the distinguished guest speakers, including Bill, who made the keynote. So the planning is that the panelists, including myself, would give some discussion points in about 6-7 minutes, and based on those broader issues being elaborated in this panel, we'll have more of a impromptu discussions afterwards, and of course we'll ask Bill to comment on some of our issues. Okay, so the order is as you have seen. Maybe it's not that order, but the topics I think are in that order. So the first topic is the outcome of the Milan ATCM on transparency discussions, and it is myself that I will summarize the discussions at the Milan meeting, which was held from the end of June to early July this year. So I would summarize the Milan ATCM as the meeting that has come to put the concept of transparency as the key to the effective Antarctic governance. The reference to the term transparency during the Milan discussion greatly increased in quantity. The term transparency appears 24 times in Milan ATCM final report, whereas we saw only 3 or so times in the previous final reports. More importantly, the discussion on transparency at the Milan was substantively robust and requires deeper analysis, both from practical and theoretical perspectives. So let's first analyze objectively in what context the term transparency was referred to in the Milan ATCM and CEP. Actually, they fit nicely to how Bill has organized the issue in his keynote, as 3 aspects of the transparency. The first transparency is the transparency as participation in the system, in his words, inclusion as legitimacy. Second, the transparency of the Antarctic activities and research results amongst the system participants through monitoring tools and information exchange. The third was the transparency of the system towards outside world by sharing, using Bill's word, understandable information from inside to the outside world. In my academic article written in 2000, analyzing the legitimacy of the ATCM as a governance forum, I used the term participation in the governance to refer to the first aspect. And I actually used a different word, accountability, of the governance system towards the international community to refer to the third aspect. At Milan ATCM, transparency was referred to in the context of, in relation to CEP, public and stakeholder engagement in CEP and openness of the CEP meetings, participation in CEP of stakeholders through observers and NGO representatives in national delegations, faster release of CEP report, and in the context of Chinese 6th Antarctic Station at Mary Bird Land, importance of CEE, the Comprehensive Environment Evaluation process, for promoting transparency in Antarctic governance. Based on these discussions, CEP agreed to include in its 5-year work plan the issue of transparency. In reaching this agreement, I think it is important to mention that the CEP members considered public significance of the CEP, of the work of the CEP towards protecting the Antarctic environment. Then more in the context of ATCM, the transparency was mentioned in the context of transparency of the Antarctic stations through inspection, transparency in the context of comprehensive review of the EIES, one party explicitly stressing the importance of exchange of information on military equipment and personnel, transparency in the context of potential experiments with geoengineering methods providing related information for the attention of ATCM. In the context of Antarctic tourism, the coordination and information sharing relating to the permits to increase transparency. And also in the context of Antarctic tourism, the use of inspection reports for increasing transparency in the context of tourism. In the context of the WP16, the working paper 16, which is now available from the website on enhancing transparency in ATCM, this is actually co-authored, proposed by the Dutch government, but co-authored by Australia and the Republic of Korea. It indicated the need for further public visibility, limited number of experts participating in ATCM meetings, limited information for broader public. According to the proponent, enhanced transparency would reinforce its public trust and legitimacy. And also, they also referred to that this kind of a transparency would encourage parties to reach consensus. Also, in the working paper 16, the specific proposals were, as an institution, hold press briefings and broader stakeholder participation in the meetings and media access to meetings. But as an individual party's efforts, I think Bill has also emphasized that the individual consultative parties can do a lot on this issue. As an individual party's efforts, publish summaries and outcomes of the meetings on official website and press release, informal press briefings and press conferences at national level on both the proceedings and the outcomes. The discussion on this proposal showed both support and caution. The discussion, however, was not streamlined because it juxtaposed different aspects of transparency, as Bill and I have already indicated, particularly the first aspect of broader participation in the governance, and the third aspect of broader public outreach as accountability. As a result, the ATCM agreed to include a new item on transparency in its multi-year strategic work plan. That means they did not decide on anything on transparency at a Milan meeting. There were several voices during the discussion that there are already existing mechanisms to enhance transparency of the system. So according to them, it is a matter for better use of those existing mechanisms rather than devising new ones. Due to time constraints, I cannot go into the details, but some of those existing mechanisms relate to rules relating to public and private meetings of the ATCM and CEP, rules relating to public availability of meeting documents and final reports, the practice of host country communique with the summary of the ATCM published right after the closure of the ATCM, the rules and the procedures relating to the invitation to participate as experts in ATCM and observers in CEP, whereas except for public-private rules of the meetings, there are no explicit rules regarding media access or media briefings, nor there are no explicit rules regarding the composition of national delegations. It is up to each of the delegations to decide. You may think this is normal, but we already have some internationally agreed practice from the Arctic rules of procedure on the Conference of the Parties to the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, suggesting some category of representatives to be included in the delegations. So this is the summary of the Milan discussions on the transparency. Thank you very much. And so can I ask Tony to have your view on the issue? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And I also want to thank some of the colleagues in the room, because I've just spent the last 3 days working with Japanese scientists about collaborations in Antarctic science between Australia and Japan, and we had a hugely successful workshop, and if you want to find out, you can talk to your colleagues here. I have a great interest in transparency. I think the fundamental tenets of the Antarctic treaty system, the fundamental tenets of the treaty itself, that is peace, the non-militarization provisions of the treaty, the banning of nuclear testing in Antarctica. These are central to global strategic interests. They're very central to Australian strategic interests, but they're also central to global strategic interests. We have a part of the planet, 7.5% in area, where it is non-militarized, and we do not expect to have armed conflict. There's also the issue of the reduction of tension between countries through Article 4 of the Antarctic Treaty on sovereignty in Antarctica. And those two things hold the common interests of not only the 12 original signatories to the Antarctic Treaty, but also every other country that has joined since then, the consultative parties and the non-consultative parties. That particular set of provisions of the treaty, I think, are central to the future of the planet. They're certainly central to the future of the Antarctic. Transparency. Bill mentioned inspections and prior advance notice. Transparency is central to maintaining those basic principles of the treaty, and building and accountability and transparency together provide what I call mutual assurance. That is, that each country knows that they can be comfortable in that environment with the other countries they're working with. That is what builds trust. It's what builds the efforts for collaboration, and having inspections as a part of that mechanism is what allows the countries to have faith that the Antarctic Treaty System is strong and will continue into the future. You're lawyers, I'm not. I'm a biologist. But there's a particular role in international law or through international agreements in, one, avoiding disputes. So some agreements are set up in order to avoid disputes, and that's what Article 4 of the Antarctic Treaty does. And other agreements are set up to resolve disputes. Now, the Antarctic Treaty is much more in the kind of agreement that is there to avoid disputes, avoid conflict. And I think we need to ensure that the Antarctic Treaty System is strong and stays strong in doing that. And inspections are inspections and reporting, and how the meetings are conducted, and whether the public can see them or not, see the outcomes of them or not, is really underpins that avoiding of disputes, strengthening the treaty. I think that's really important. What are the tools? Well, Bill mentioned some of them, but I have a personal view. My personal view is that we should allow the general public to see, not all of, because some discussions need to be held confidentially, need to be conducted in a confidential manner for all kinds of reasons. But I have a personal view that that the adoption of the report of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting should be open to the public. I think the opening sessions of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, the opening plenary, should be open to public viewing, because I think that is another component of transparency that builds mutual assurance and trust. It means that countries can't behave badly behind closed doors. They actually have to go back to the basics of the Antarctic Treaty and define why they're there. That is, maintain Antarctica free from conflict and also dispute avoidance. Over the next couple of years, I'll be working with colleagues in Australia and elsewhere, looking at how we can modernise the Antarctic inspection regime to bring it from 1958 up to 2028 and beyond. The Antarctic Treaty itself has a remarkable provision for the Cold War, and that is that any party can inspect any other party's facility without notice, and some of those inspections can be done remotely. So in 1958, that was aerial inspection. I'd like to see how you lawyers in the room might think, well, what does a modern, how would you translate the 1958 provision for aerial inspection into 2028 and beyond? And I think there's a great capacity to do that. And that's what I'll be doing for the next 2 to 3 years as a part of a project that's just been agreed in Australia. There are a number of criticisms of the Antarctic Treaty, the conduct of the ATCM, and its decision, and the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, its decision-making paralysis on some issues that it has at the moment. But that is not the reason to go off and try and do something else. I think for everyone that's engaged in international negotiation and decision-making, you should always engage the concept of the counterfactual. So philosophers will know what a counterfactual is. And the counterfactual is, if the Antarctic Treaty isn't there, what would be there? Would you be able to negotiate in 2030 or 2040 or 2050? Would you be able to negotiate an international treaty that provides non-militarization, no weapons testing, and bans mining, for instance? So those things are really important. Thank you. That's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Then can I ask Hyoung Chul to have your comment? Thank you.
Thank you. The kind of perspectives that I can offer is one from an institution that practices scientific research as its main mission, and also a one from a relative latecomer from Asia that now invests significantly, and also from a national program that should enter and implement partnership with multiple countries who do not necessarily share same philosophy or stances. You just have to help with everybody. Maybe I can talk about three things. First of all, I'm a fan of transparency. There is no doubt about it. But I'm also interested in making things work in real world. So it will make sense to reflect upon possibly unidentical definition of transparency from different sides, and to think over what we would like to see in the end. So it is about, for me, transparency, it is about being open and allowing people or community to see and to access information, and then decision-making process as well. But this is not the same as enabling to participate. So it is being open and exposed. And also it is about being accountable, being able to explain why some decisions were taken and why some stances were taken. This is, again, from responsibility. But we talked a lot about information, but should transparency end in information? Transparency should not be just about information. Well, if the essence is applying pressures for some to change their stances or change their courses, however the pressure gentle they are, it may not work so well. They are not going to change their minds anyway quite easily. So what matters at the end of the day is collective decisions or decision making. So it's not just about information, but what we should be doing with such information, shared information. And secondly, for science, for me it's awkward and sometimes embarrassing to see the imperfectness of science, which is inevitable, used as an excuse to defer decisions and not to take actions, resulting in continuing inactions. But when some say, well, it's not that I'm not buying science, but the science that I'm hearing is not enough for me to change my mind, that kind of. So if we can talk about and somehow agree upon scientific defensibility and acceptability for some proposals being made, and somehow develop some criteria in this regard, can we at least embark upon and undertake a dialogue in this regard with countries or with partners with different views? And at this point, perhaps upcoming large international field campaigns such as IPY 2032-33 or Antarctica in Sync can be hinted or can be encouraged to collect relative information on some controversial issues, because these campaigns will be participated by many, almost all countries who are serious about Antarctic research. And thirdly, inspections. Well, I think Antarctic Treaty came into being in a time of Cold War, like when it was signed 1959. So that was 6 years after the closure or temporary closure of Korean War. So it's obviously from a time of Cold War. So as we just heard, inspections at a very short notice by usual global powers are rather typical inspections so far. But as we heard, more cooperative, participate by so far unusual members, relatively low cost or lower cost, aided by emerging technologies, can somehow assist in elevated transparency. So I don't think we can rewrite the relevant elements in our Antarctic Treaty, but if you can show there could be some alternative, equally successful cases of inspection, and that's known to everybody before or after, and I think it's one powerful mechanism or case of increased, resulting in increased transparency. That's where I stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, very good to have a broad perspective on many of the issues. Thank you very much. So before we go to the floor, maybe I can ask Bill if you have any additional comments from based on us, or maybe even following your keynote. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity here to be with this distinguished panel. I'm very much cognizant of the significant experience and wisdom here and I greatly appreciate being able to learn. So this is fabulous here. I do want to pick up a little bit on this last point here. It might be easier to build, it might be hard to change treaty provisions, but it might be easier to build on top of it. And I do very much think that that is the case. These provisions, in a counterfactual that Tony pointed out, it's very difficult to change existing well-established provisions, but it might be possible to add on to them. This is what was done with the environmental protocol, and it's been done with the environmental protocol annexes. It doesn't change the treaty, but it builds upon it in order to address new issues that have come on up, and that there was consensus to address in a manner that was consistent with the system that already existed and continued to advance those interests, in particular sovereignty and peace, but while also expanding its coverage to environmental protection and sustainability. And so as we talk about transparency, I do encourage us all to consider not necessarily what a perfect treaty would look like. We all realize we are not in a perfect world, but how do we add on to this system that we have in a manner that gets us closer to where we would like to be? There's been a few comments about potentially live streaming or otherwise making public the treaty meetings or CEP. A fair number of countries do that domestically. They publish or they have live stream what their Congress or Parliament is up to. And if you look at the Antarctic Treaty as a governance agreement, it would be logically consistent to consider an ATCM or a CEP as branches of how a governance of a region is occurring, similar to how countries publicize their own domestic governance systems. This is, of course, a cautionary note. I've seen no particular evidence that politicians in particular in their congresses or parliaments have a higher level of moderation. They can be quite feisty when given a microphone and a television camera. So there could be downsides to seeing how decisions are made, but there are upsides as well for transparency, for that showing of information, that providing of information. But we also do get back to some of the points that have been made here about having it be not just providing information, but providing influence. And so that's going to be one of the things that all of us have to consider is what is the right balance between information and influence. They may be reinforcing, but they may not be. So let me halt here. Thank you.
Yes, the last point, the influence or the information. We also had in Milan the discussion on how the influencers of the SNS are actually influencing the governance of the Antarctica. But the discussion was a little bit more of the negative side of this SNS influencers. So I think that's a good point also. Okay, anything to add from the panelists based on Bill's, or we can go right to the audience for any other comments or any discussion points or even questions relating to what we have discussed today. You have to, yes, speak into the microphone.
Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I got loads of questions, but
maybe you might want to identify yourself for the record.
I'm Elizabeth Lean. I'm Professor of Antarctic Studies at the University of Tasmania. And I have loads of questions, but I'll just ask one, sort of aimed at Bill, but also maybe Tony. Bill, you mentioned about perhaps we could make the CEP more transparent because it's not dealing with questions of sovereignty, it's dealing with environmental questions and so forth. And then Tony mentioned CAMLR, and I'm just wondering about CAMLR. It feels like it's less transparent even than the ATCMs. I live in Hobart where CAMLR happens. You wouldn't know it was happening unless you were there effectively. It's not even reported barely in the local newspaper. But this is an agreement that's ostensibly about marine conservation, not about sovereignty. So what about opening that up? It's a bit of a black box at the moment.
Thank you very much for that question. Certainly, so I did not speak too much about CAMLR. This is what I call the fish management, marine management system out there. I know, I'm sorry. I'm just a policy guy. And because that is not specifically underneath the purview of the ATCM. So it makes its own, it has its own members. It makes its own decisions and not otherwise reviewed. You are completely accurate, though, in that, in particular, that it has less information that is readily available than the ATCM. So CAMLR documents are not necessarily immediately available, and a fair number of them you cannot access, even after the conclusion of a CAMLR meeting. The process to get these documents involves not just looking at the website and downloading it and reading it. It involves reaching out to the CAMLR secretary and asking to receive documents. And a fair number of those documents are just not available, do not, they need permission and whatnot. So within the Antarctic Treaty System, CAMLR is one way, is more restrictive in its information sharing than the ATCM and CEP. And so one of the things that I would encourage us all is to review how different aspects of the Antarctic Treaty System do operate and figure out if there are desires and if there's ways to level up. Is it a possibility, and would it be beneficial for CAMLR to be more similar in its paper dissemination, more similar to what the ATCM currently provides? I know as somebody who follows Antarctica, I would love to have easier access to those documents. Would it necessarily change how the decisions that are being made in CAMLR about krill or about marine protected areas? Maybe, maybe not. But there would certainly be more knowledge about what all is happening. So yeah, increasing information share, very important. Influencing the decisions, that's going to be critical for all of us as we move forward.
Just let me follow on from that. Thank you, Bill. For those, if there's anybody online, CAMLR is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. And it's a conservation convention that does provide for the management of marine living resources, including the regulation of the harvesting of marine living resources. But other than that, I'm going to say that my comments about transparency apply to all parts of the Antarctic Treaty System. And yes, it is true that the CAMLR, the Commission itself, is separate from the decision-making processes of the ATCM, but every country that signs the convention actually has a specific, that not only the countries that become members of the Commission, but any country that signs the convention actually has a specific obligation to the Antarctic Treaty in certain aspects. So they are, the CAMLR is intimately embedded in the Antarctic Treaty System and linked to the Antarctic Treaty itself. I do believe my comments about transparency and how it might be applied is really important, as important in CAMLR as anywhere else. There will be some things that are discussed inside the Commission that have a certain commercial in confidence nature, because it might actually, some of the convention actually covers some legitimate exclusive economic zones of other countries, Australia, France, Norway and others. And so there will be certain bits of information that have a commercial in confidence or other in confidence classification that I think shouldn't be, or there are legitimate reasons why that information shouldn't be in the public domain. But as a general rule, I think the way papers are dealt with inside CAMLR should match the way papers are dealt with in the ATCM and elsewhere. So I agree with Bill on that. Just flicking across very quickly to inspections. The inspections in CAMLR are very different because it's based on US law, actually, from way back in the day, and it's ship-based inspections and very much to do with appointing inspectors. I actually think the CAMLR inspection regime needs to be hugely modernised. And that's enough of my time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. So could you identify yourself and try to be a little bit brief summary? Thank you.
Of course. Good morning. My name is Patrizia Cavalcanti. I'm from Agenda Antarctica and Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition. Thank you very much for the panel. It was incredibly insightful. And my question is, as we discussed transparency and the existence of some mechanism that should be polished or better used, what would be the roadmap now that we're moving forward Hiroshima, ATCM 2026? What could we expect as the follow-up as this discussion? What could we think about we could achieve to or at Hiroshima 2026? And thank you again for each member of the panel. It was a great panel.
Thank you very much. Maybe Hyoung Chul, as a co-proponent of that paper, working paper 16, Korea, Australia, and the Netherlands, you might have some idea how that paper would be discussed into the future towards Hiroshima and then even in Korea. Thank you.
I was actually going to talk about my own question that may come from the floor. Like, I wonder, are there things that the chair or secretariat can do to have the information far more widely shared and better explained with more details? Like, in some meetings, chairs release a statement. So, for example, it's not just a 5-sentence what were discussed and what were done, but if there was some meaningful decisions made, are there any provisions that restrict such initiatives with Kevlar or Antarctic Treaty?
Another question, but maybe Bill, you might want to also get together.
Okay. So when it comes to provisions and measures, I generally work under the theory if it's not explicitly prohibited, then you can at least think about trying to get away with it. Now that then bops into 60 years worth of tradition, so some consideration. But what I recommend for next steps here are actually well before Hiroshima. What are the activities that those who are interested in increasing transparency, what can they do now? Talk to their governments, talk to the organizations, to the observers that have status within the ATCM and the CEP, talk to the expert entities about how do we increase transparency and what steps are all of us willing to do. Now, there's 29 consultative parties. These are our members of the treaty. There's no, as far as I can tell, effective way to downgrade one of these 29 consultative parties. This question came up with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Is there a way you can manage Antarctica without Russia? No, there isn't. There's no way of getting them out of the treaty without they themselves agreeing. So those consultative parties, those 29 members, have a special privileged position that gives them security that others do not. So organizations such as ASOC, an environmental coalition that does great work, they're at a more sensitive spot than countries such as those represented here on the panel and elsewhere. So it's up to them to decide, up to those consultative parties to decide, okay, well, we have a privileged spot. How do we use that? How do we help? And then every individual organization will have their own decision-making process for how do they want to push the envelope. Is transparency the issue that they want to raise the flag on? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. But maybe I would actually respond to Patricia's point, the factual information from Milan meetings. Of course, we haven't really decided the scheduling of how the transparency will be enhanced. But I think it's important that we talk about the elements of transparency rather than just talking about the transparency. So for example, with regard to the public availability of documents, especially the faster publication of reports, final reports. There was a discussion there, and the issue is more of a technical issue. It's because the final report has to be translated into other 4 languages, and that takes time. And so the Secretariat, I think they promised to make their efforts to translate the final reports earlier so that it can be published. According to the rules, I think it was within 3 months for the provisional final report to be publicly available, and the final version within 6 months. And the discussion was it's too late, so that the Secretariat, I think, will try to fasten that scheduling, even though the rules are there. The other issue with regard to the information availability through the EIES, which is another aspect of transparency, and there is a intersessional consultation contact group regarding the review of the EIES. So it is going on during the intersession, how to improve the EIES system so that there will be more transparent information on the EIES. So those, I think I remember 2 issues. But I also heard during the discussion on this issue, for example, there are a lot of discretions on the part of the host government, especially with regard to more informal press briefings. And I would hope coming up, a host of Japan would actually conduct such a informal host government press briefings during or maybe before and after the ATCM. I think that will happen according to some of the interventions made during the ATCM. And I'm sure Korea, after that, being a proponent of this working paper, I would assume the more transparency would come from the host government. Okay, so those are some information, but Tony, yes, please.
I mean, I'll just respond to Hyoung Chul's question, actually. The secretariats of both the Commission, Kamala, and the Secretariat of the Antarctic Treaty are very, very much a servant of the meetings. The parties that established both secretariats were very clear that they did not become international organisations in their own right. So the ATCM owns the secretariat, and one of the established practices is that the executive secretaries do not take on an advocacy role in international bodies. They are there merely to represent what the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting said or the Kamala Commission meeting said. And I don't think that will ever change, at least not in the next decade or so. But I do think, to follow up from what Professor Shibata just said, I do think there is a role for the host country to actually, and for other parties going to these meetings, to actually get outside and say, well, today we discussed this, and this. We are making good progress in this area, or we're not making any progress at all in this area. It's very difficult. These are the reasons we're not making progress. I think having the courage to do that is really important. And I think that some countries, I'm not pointing at any countries in particular, but some countries might start that as a practice in order to establish, there's nothing wrong with doing this, to use your rule, there's no law against it. And I think that would really build public confidence in, more public confidence in the system.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, we still have like 5 minutes. So may I? We are not receiving the online questions. Yes, it's just for listening. Thank you. I think Hyoung Chul touched upon this issue. The discussion on the transparency is necessary in order to have an effective governance system. So transparency itself is not the goal, but the transparency is a tool for an effective governance. And there has been some discussions during the Milan also that media access or online or actual press journalists coming into the meetings would actually promote consensus. Do you agree to that? Or there should be some sensitivities? For example, that should be restricted only to the CEP rather than the ATCM, for example. Do you have any views whether media access either online or at the venue with the certain journalists coming into the meetings, that they can actually observe the meeting so that the consensus can be achieved better? Do you agree to that kind of argument?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I believe there's been a fair amount of media reporting about marine protected areas over the past, say, 15 years, give or take. And there has been one marine protected area that was adopted over that 15-year period, and that is the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area that the New Zealand and the United States promoted, and then used very high-level interventions at the ministries and Secretary of State level in order to achieve. So for 15 years, there's been a steady, essentially, opposition to marine protected areas by multiple countries, and that is well known. I'm not certain that providing access to that opposition in the moment will change that opposition to a long-standing position held by various countries. It might. It certainly could be worth a try, because the current system has led to 15 years worth of not meeting the goals established by CAMLR to establish a representative network of marine protected areas. But transparency itself, or observation of a process, does not predispose a result. It just gives more insight into how the whole process works, from my perspective. And you could apply that out on other issues as well. I'm happy for others, though, to share their thoughts on this.
Well, everyone, at least in this room, is a believer of transparency. And open kitchen restaurant, so hygiene, taste, whatever, it helps in the end. But in real world, beginning with media access may not work very well. But media briefings, as we learned today, there is a large room for discretion and initiative for the chair country or host government. And I think you can introduce such, like ATCM 26, illustrated and explained, blah, blah. And I think if it gets repeated, then it will be standard practices, then it will become a tradition. Then other countries who may not feel that comfortable will still have to follow, do this kind of well-explained briefing. So I hope that becomes the case for the future.
Yeah. I agree with all of that. There's something else I think that we should factor into this discussion about transparency, and that is capacity building. And I think there's a real role for leading countries when I say leading countries, I mean countries that have large economic investment in Antarctic research and Antarctic governance. There's a role for them to build capacity of countries with smaller financial contributions, for smaller delegations. And I think that would also increase transparency, because it would give those countries confidence to engage at a level that disseminates information out into the global environment.
Good. That was a very good point. Thank you very much. So I think we can now conclude the morning session of the kickoff seminar on strengthening the transparency of the Antarctic Treaty System. Thank you very much for your participation. And again, we will continue this kind of seminars towards Hiroshima, and probably with the Dr. Shin's approval, maybe towards Korea's ATCM, of course, right? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll continue this. Thank you very much, and thank you for participation. Thank you very much.